Hey guys, I think I'm live. I'm just going to double check really quick here. All right, I think I'm good to go. Welcome. I hope you guys are good. I hope all is well and that you're healthy. I'm back today to talk about the marital point of no return. And this is something that has been on my mind for a long time, actually, because I feel like this comes up a lot. And just a few days ago, I spoke to a woman who reminded me of this concept of once you reach a certain point, it's really too late. And then there's so much regret around not being able to get to the point that she's at now sooner because it would have really made a big difference. So just real briefly, I won't get into all the details, but I talked to this woman last week who she's been married for over 10 years and things have been good for most of the marriage, or so she thought. But he kept telling her over the years that he felt like he couldn't satisfy her, that there was a lot of things that she wasn't happy with, and he just didn't know if he could make her happy. She was pretty controlling. She was on the controlling side, and he had told her he felt criticized. She sort of brushed it off over time because she thought, this is a really good man. We really love each other. She would own it a little bit and then kind of go back to the way that it was. They'd resolve it and move on, and it never really stopped, though, this pattern that they were in. And she kept thinking, this is just part of a good relationship, and we'll be together forever, right? But what happened was he started to withdraw, and she started to feel uncertain, and she confronted him about it, and then he actually ended up moving out and told her, look, I don't even know if I see a future with you. And he's feeling really ambivalent, and he's not leaving her with any hope. He's not saying what he wants. He's not wanting to work on the marriage with her. He's not saying I want to break up, but he's also not saying that he wants to move back in together. So she has no leverage. And so as we were talking, what came up was that she was just, not just anxious about the fact that there's all this uncertainty and not knowing what the future is going to hold, because she really wants this marriage to work. She feels like this is a really good man, and I feel like I don't want to lose him as a person. But the worst part for her was just the regret that she felt in feeling like it was her fault, or not, that she wasn't listening, that she didn't really take in what he was trying to say, and that she wasn't taking seriously enough the things he was saying, that how often she was pointing out. In her case, this was the specific dynamic, in that she was pointing out the things he was falling short on a lot. She was criticizing him a lot, and really leading with accusations. Why didn't you do this? Why did you do it this way? All of that, right? And this could be different in different relationships, but the phenomenon remains the same, which is that once they would gloss it over, she wouldn't take it seriously, like this is really a problem. And that even though we can make up afterwards, if this isn't fixed, this person might actually not want to work on this with me by the time I'm ready, right? So now she's willing to make changes, and she's recognizing a lot of the behaviors that she was engaging in, some of the controlling behaviors, were just really coming from a place of fear and her family of origin. And she was starting to have all these insights, and she went to individual therapy, and she realized, like, okay, now I know why. Now I know the impact that this is really having, and now I'm really ready to make these changes. But now he's not interested in working on it with her. And so she's trying to do it on her own, but he's not really noticing the changes that she's making. And she feels like if this had been 2 years ago, he would have noticed. Like I would have had more traction if I had made these changes a couple of years ago. But right now he's just sort of despondent. He's sort of in despair. He's hopeless. He doesn't really believe the changes. He's not trusting the changes. And so he doesn't want to say to her, okay, great, thank you for making the changes. Now let's get back together, because he's afraid they'll go right back to square one. And she kept saying over and over, like, I really just wish I could go back in time. I wish I could go back in time and really have gotten to where I am now sooner, while he was still here, and we would have had a chance to get somewhere with this. And after we got off the phone, I was thinking about not just her situation, because I felt really sad for her. I had a lot of empathy for her, but it also just reminded me of a lot of people that I've talked to who were in the same boat, and what a pervasive thing this is. And like I said, it's been on my mind for a long time, but it got me to thinking after I talked to her, why is it that people wait until the point of no return to truly stop and look inward and become awake and make the changes? Why is it that so many people, they don't access their willingness to make the changes and do the work that's required to make those changes until it's too late? or until it might be too late and it's not yet too late, but they fear that it's too late, and then they're not able to do it because now they have all the anxiety of the uncertainty of their spouse leaving on top of the difficulty of the inner work that has to be done, and it's almost impossible. So I thought about it and I realized, I think that there's probably a lot of reasons, but today I'm just going to share the top 3 that come up in the conversations as I explore like what was going on before, like how did it come to this? Because a lot of times what people say is, I didn't realize it was that bad. Like, yeah, I knew that there was a problem, but we were just like any other married couple. We talked about it, we moved on, and it was fine, but it wasn't fine for the other person. Like somewhere it wasn't going in. So for the first thing I think that gets in the way is that they don't recognize the danger zone that they're in. They just don't recognize the signs. They don't understand that it is that bad. And so it's just a lack of knowledge. So that would be the first thing, right? And that could be because they just don't know the signs, right? Or because they're not listening because they're in denial. And they could be in denial because they're subconsciously avoiding. It's not that they don't have the information, it's that they're not wanting to look at the information that has been given because either they're scared of what's going to come up, they're scared of failing, they're scared of, looking at themselves and will they feel shame? Maybe they're defending against shame. Maybe they have to look at family of origin or like, why is this coming up for me? Things like that, where they just want to put their head in the sand and go into denial. And then the other thing is, I think people want to prioritize their comfort zone, it goes hand in hand with denial. But it's not so much that they're trying to avoid something difficult, but it's more like they're just prioritizing something else that feels better, right? Obviously the comfort zone feels better. And so they're going to be prioritizing that because, like, for example, let's say their work is a place where they get mirrored, they get messages back to themselves about, their areas of competency or their identity. Let's say they feel powerful at work, they feel efficient and competent at work, but they don't feel that way at home with their spouse, or they feel safe with their guy friends, but with their spouse where the stakes are so high and it's so intimate and who you really are is coming to the light, that can be really threatening. And so it's more like, I want to go where things feel good, and so I'm going to prioritize that, but they're not aware that they're doing that. It's like a subconscious mechanism to just go where it feels good, which is in a sense a form of denial, but it's not so much avoidance as it is actively seeking out something else that feels good. And they just don't want to hear the feedback. If either their ego is getting in the way, or the gravity of the work that lies ahead is too hard to bear, or the fear of things getting really messy, the fear of being vulnerable, all of those things can come up. And it's only when they've been really woken up by when their spouse walks away, by the departure of their spouse or the ambivalence of their spouse, like now they're checked out. Maybe they didn't walk away, but they're checked out now. It's only then that they become really, truly awake. Like it takes a crisis sometimes where people will wake up and go, oh, what am I doing? This is the most important thing. Why have I not made this the most important thing? And that's when they realize that their subconscious programs have actually been lulling them and sabotaging their progress and making them think that other things are more important when that's not really the case. And I think that's one of the biggest problems. And I've talked about this before, if you've heard my masterclass, which is, the subconscious programming, those old programs, the subconscious beliefs that run our lives, they're 90% responsible for the printout of our life. And they are literally 10 million times more powerful than our conscious intentions. And I got that from Bruce Lipton in his book, Biology of Belief. So that's just your autopilot. And so you have to be really awake all the time, unless you can clear out those programs and unless you can do the work of changing those programs to get them on board with what your conscious intentions are. And I think that's the tragedy of the situation, is that, people who really love each other and they really believe they're going to be together for life and they're really committed to each other and they don't want to be with anybody else and they have everything to lose, that they won't, if they can't transcend their programming and if they don't prioritize the work to do that, that it becomes tragic for them. Like, their families become ripped apart. They feel devastated. They feel like a failure. Then they carry that into the next relationship. It's just worlds of pain are caused because of this denial that people go into. And so today what I want to talk about, and before we get into that, because I'm going to break this down a little bit and we can talk about what you can do about this, but I think that what makes it worse is society has this messaging around romantic relationships and how important romantic relationships are. It's all about that, right? And it's all about the ceremony and the part that looks good, the part that's validating, the part that feels good, you know, like the drug high part of a relationship. And so people spend all this time and energy on planning a wedding, and that is reinforced by our culture. Whereas spending that same kind of resource and that kind of investment and, you know, blocking it off on the calendar and sitting down to talk about things, that is not prioritized once people are actually married. And it's just backwards, in my opinion. So the larger cultural context in which we're doing this work does not help us at all. So today I want to just talk about, you know, first, just to bring this to your attention, if this is something that you feel like you're in the danger zone, to be aware of, and what to look out for. What are the signs and the symptoms of reaching this point of no return, and what you can do to prevent crossing that line. And obviously the point of no return essentially means, I don't really need to say this, but it essentially means that once you cross that line, you just can't go back again. It doesn't matter how much you change. It doesn't matter what you do, because your spouse's psyche, or one of your, depending on which side of this equation you're at, one person's psyche has already processed the grief, they've already processed the betrayal and the loss, and they've been grieving it, and it's over now. Like in their psyche, they've closed the chapter, and they just don't want to open that up again, either because they don't believe it's possible or because they just feel like completed, like that's over and I'm ready for something new, and I don't want to do the work anymore, right? So if you're in that boat and you feel like the biggest danger to be aware of is if you cross that line, and then you decide, okay, I'm going to try to pull this back, and now I'm going to really be serious and show up and do this work, that it might still work, but it's just going to be so much harder, because all the time and energy that you spend that should have been spent 2 years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago, it's just not going to get the same amount of traction, because they're not going to be receptive to it in the same way. And it's a relationship. It's not in a vacuum. So that has to be there. Their receptivity has to still be there. There has to be at least one part of their brain that's going to be open to that. So I want to help you recognize the symptoms and what you can do if you feel like you're getting into that territory where it's too late. The first thing is, one of the things that I see, and really what I'm going to be saying is, I'm going to be identifying patterns in relationships that are very predictive or associated with divorce. Some of this is based off of research, and some of this is based off of my own experience. First is that if there's one partner or both partners have a chronic refusal to take accountability for their part in any given dynamic, if they have a stake 99% of the time in always flipping things back on you, never apologizing. If you're with someone that never apologizes, or if you're someone who never apologizes and you're just waiting for things to blow over so you can go back to normal, but you don't really apologize or actually repair, those are the relationships that are in danger, because you have to be able to repair. It's not about perfection and never having disconnection or falling out of, being in repair. The intimacy is built off of repairing after disconnection. But if you just fall out of good graces with each other and you're on bad terms, and then you just wait for that to pass until you feel like reconnecting, but the things that happened never got repaired, the things never got solved, it's just a ticking time bomb. So those are the red flags. You want to have, accountability. Of course, it's better to have both people taking accountability, but there's often successful couples where you could have one spouse that tends to take more accountability for their part than the other person, or might be quicker to apologize than the other person. And that doesn't mean that they're in the danger zone. But if you're with someone who never apologizes and you just can't repair, and you feel like we're having the same argument that we had 10 years ago and nothing ever changes and there's no repair, and I don't feel like they have any remorse for the ways that this has hurt me, then you're in the danger zone. Or the other way around, if your spouse has told you that if they're bringing up past hurts and they're still talking about that, and you're kind of thinking to yourself, I wish they would just drop it, that's over now, then you're in danger zone, that they're going to get to a point where they feel like they're not going to get the repair that they need from you, and that waiting for them to just get over it is not going to work. So that's the first thing to be aware of. The other thing is, oh, and I want to add one more thing, is there is always there's a normal amount of blame that happens in a healthy relationship. Like, I'm not recommending it. Like, I think it's good to have a zero blame policy in your relationship and always take full accountability for your feelings and what it is that you want, and ask for those things. But it is normal in an intimate relationship where we will release our locus of control and put it onto them and blame them for our experiences. But if one or both of you is like willing to initiate backing up and saying, all right, we got it, we're each responsible for our own happiness here, and we are going to take accountability, and we can apologize, then you're fine. I just wanted to say that in case there was any confusion about that. The other thing that you want to look out for is that you really can't see the good in each other anymore. If you feel like your spouse just doesn't see you in a positive light at all, and you don't even know why they like you or why they picked you or why they love you, and you don't get those messages ever, you're in danger zone. Or the other way around. If you're looking at your spouse and all you're seeing is what they're not doing right or how they're failing you, or you just don't see what's good in them, you're definitely in danger zone. And that's because that's connected to contempt, and I'm going to get into that in just a second. But I actually have a couple that I'm working with right now, and I asked them each, what is it that you like about your spouse? And they could not answer the question. And they had to go way back to, all right, when I first met this person, what did I like about this person? But it was a stretch. It was like really hard. And this is an extreme case, but if you can't see the good in each other anymore, and so you spend most of your time like working on the relationship, trying to get them to see how they're wrong and trying to get them to see the error of their ways, because you just need them to see that, then you're in like, you're vying for the victim position essentially. And you're in like the red zone area. So that's something to look out for. Do I hold my partner in positive regard? Does my partner hold me in positive regard? And what can I do to change that? And if you're not able to change that with an active effort to do so, then you're definitely in danger zone, because somehow you're just not able to see each other in the present moment any longer. But you think you are, but you're not. And then you're literally operating off of a delusion, and you're never going to be actually be able to work on the relationship in the present moment, because you're going to be seeing everything through the lenses of the past. And everything that's happened before is coloring how you interpret them. So that's something to be aware of. The other thing that I want to mention here is that, and some of you might have already become familiar with the work of Dr. John Gottman, who's done, world-renowned research on marriages, and he predicts, he has been able to isolate the variables on his longitudinal research. He's tracked couples for like 20 plus years, and he's able to see with a very high degree of accuracy which components are going to lead to divorce. And there's 4 things that he's identified. He calls them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. You can Google this or go to YouTube and you'll find all kinds of stuff on this. But just the nutshell, the 4 things are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Those are the 4 things that you want to really be aware of. Now, these things can happen in a relationship that's not destined to fail, but it really has to do with the ratio of the amount of times that this is happening and how much this makes up the fabric of your life. So the 5-to-1 ratio obviously is a really big part of this. If you have a 5-to-1 ratio or higher of positive interactions to negative interactions, then even if you have a little bit of blame here and there, there's still 5 times as many positive interactions. And so the culture of your relationship, the biosphere, the air between you, the environment of your relationship is still going to be overall healthy, even though there's still some things that are not perfect. So you want to look at the ratio of this specifically. But criticism, just to be real specific about what he talks about when he's talking about criticism, is anytime you're making an attack on the other person's character, it's name calling, it's generalizing, it's linking what they've done wrong now with what they've always done wrong. Like, It's linking what they're doing now with what they've always done. You always, you never. When you globalize about their character and speak for who they are as a human being, and you're saying negative things about their character, that's criticism. It's not the same thing as complaining. Then there's contempt. Well, actually, I'm going to save that one for last. Then there's defensiveness, and defensiveness is triggered by criticism, but it's just as destructive, right? Because defensiveness is where righteous indignation comes in, and the table turning that happens, like somebody brings something up to you, and then you say, yeah, well, you did this, and it's just, you flip it around on them, and you don't tell them what is bothering you until they tell you something that's bothering them, and now you're going to tell them what's bothering you. That is a huge block to connection, and chronic defensiveness will destroy relationships. And even if the other person is in the wrong for criticizing, there are things you can do to not be defensive and to be able to call out the other person and invite them into a better conversation around what they're bringing to your attention in a way that's not critical. You can take the reins on that. You don't have to just react because they criticized in a defensive manner. So, and again, this has to do with how often this is happening. If your spouse is telling you that you're defensive a lot and you feel like you're constantly trying to protect your reputation in their eyes, your relationship is in danger. The other thing is stonewalling. And this gets even more severe because when people are fighting, there's still a better chance because they're still in the fight. Like they're still trying to work it out. They're still trying to be seen or heard. They're still trying to reach an understanding or get to the other side. A lot of fights are just a protest against disconnection. But once you move into stonewalling, and which is essentially withdrawal and like shutdown without any resolution, like this is the silent treatment. This is just walking away and ignoring or leaving the house and not telling them when you're coming back, and then you never talk about it again. Stonewalling is really entering into dangerous territory because it feels like a betrayal. It's registered as a betrayal. It's a complete shutting off of yourself to your spouse. It's like literally you're not even in a relationship with them when you're stonewalling them. There is no dynamic between you. You cannot hear them and they cannot reach you. It is just like a wall, right? That's getting into dangerous territory. And then that leads to parallel lives, which I'm going to get into in a minute, but I want to mention the fourth, what Dr. Gottman calls the horsemen of the apocalypse, which is contempt. And contempt is what he identified as the single biggest predictor for divorce or splitting up. And contempt is essentially an attitude of hostility and just hatred of like holding your spouse in a very low opinion. And it doesn't even have to come through words. It can come through eye rolling. It can come through like scoffing or sarcasm or ridicule or mocking. Like if you imitate your spouse and you mock them, you make fun of them, sarcastic digs in on them. The eye rolling thing is really big too. And there's certain like body language where you indicate that you think they're ridiculous through your body language. Like you're ridiculous is a very contemptuous sort of attitude to have, and people don't realize how damaging that really is. Sometimes people feel like they're justified doing that in an argument because it's like, well, they are being ridiculous, but it's a deeper betrayal because what you're saying to them really is, I don't think well of you. I could probably do better. Like it makes the person feel like this big, right? That's what contempt does. And sometimes there's one person in the relationship that has more of the contempt, and sometimes both people, it goes both ways. Either way, it doesn't matter if it's only one of you. That is the biggest predictor for splitting up, is if you are living in a culture of contempt in your relationship. And then that, of course, then you combine that with a lack of repair or a lack of accountability or a lack of a willingness to apologize, then you're really in the red zone. Another thing he talks about too is harsh startup. Harsh startup is where you're trying to work on the relationship, and it's a really tricky thing because in your mind you think you're working on it, you think you're fighting for the relationship, but when you come forward with a harsh startup, it sounds like we need to talk, or you did that again kind of thing. Like we need to talk, and you come at someone with a level of intensity, even if you're using the right words. And I've done this before where I thought I was doing it the right way because I was using the right words. But if you're coming with that attitude, that harsh startup where you're not asking them if it's a good time to talk, you're not leading into it, you're not coming from a place of connection, that chronically puts you in, it sets the stage for these four horsemen. It sets the stage for defensiveness. It sets the stage for stonewalling, contempt, and all that stuff. So that's not the same thing, but it's one of those behaviors that you can observe that will tell you that you're in the danger area, that it might not be too late, if you can recognize this. Don't accept that. Don't accept that as this is just how our relationship is. They understand. That's just how I am. I just get really intense sometimes. You don't want to give yourself that excuse. Do not give yourself permission to be disrespectful, no matter how justified you feel because of what they did to you. And I think that's where people get into the danger zone. When you really feel like you're in that righteous rage place, you are so indignant and righteous. And let's face it, we've all been there. Like, I'm not judging, but if you're in that place of righteousness, you're going to give yourself permission to behave very poorly, and you're going to justify it in your mind, and you're not going to recognize how really damaging that is. And that if that goes on too long, eventually your spouse is going to shut down on you, and they're going to reach that point of no return. So that's definitely something to look for. And then finally, what I see a lot is where I talk to people and I can tell, like, this isn't going to work out because they're identifying all of these things that I just mentioned are in their relationship. And yet they're still having the attitude of waiting for things to change or waiting for them to change. Well, when things get better, or when we have more time, or when this problem is solved, then we will. Or, well, once I think that they're open to it and they're nice to me, then I'll be nice to them. Or once I finish this, really stressful period at work, as long as you're still waiting and not tapping into the power that you have right now to come in and catalyze a transformation, you're not responsible for the changes of your spouse, but if you can be a catalyst in the environment in which the relationship lives, or what Terry Real calls the biosphere. If you can change the air between you, you make a healthier environment through what you bring to the table, even if you think you're only 2% of the problem, but it doesn't happen at a convenient time. It's not going to ever be convenient. It's not ever going to be comfortable. It's not ever going to feel like, now's the right time. It feels really good to do this right now. Now there's just this magical opening in my life, and everything is now, it's a green light, and it feels I'm ready to do this now. It doesn't usually happen that way. It usually happens where you are leaving your comfort zone and taking the bull by the horns. It comes through defiant commitment to take a stand from the inside out and say, I have power to make changes right now, and really connect with how powerful that actually is. I'm not talking about saying, be perfect and let your spouse be a jerk. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there's so much that you can do to not even let that dynamic exist anymore at all. So that is another danger zone too, is waiting. What are you waiting for? What are people waiting for? A lot of times people are waiting for that crisis subconsciously, not consciously, but subconsciously. If you feel like your programs are waiting until things get to a crisis level, you're going to make it 10 times harder for yourself. And at that point in time, and I know this because I've worked with so many people who have been there, they would give anything to go back to an earlier point in their relationship and do that work then. Even though it was going to be work, it wasn't going to be as hard. It wasn't going to be as bloody and painful, So that's my last thing that I think is a red flag to look for. And now I want to, and I'll just kind of recap really quick. Lack of accountability, like chronic blame and not being able to repair those things. Ongoing lack of ability to repair, not being able to see the good in each other anymore, criticism, contempt, stonewalling, defensiveness, and harsh startup. Okay, and then waiting for that to change outside yourself. If you have Any of the first things I mentioned combined with the waiting for that to happen outside yourself, it really is just a matter of time before you get to that point, because things build, toxins build, just like in a body, right? Like if toxins build in a body, eventually you reach a point where you have cancer. And now it's going to be a heck of a lot harder to get healthy again, if at all, if you can, right? If you can clear the stuff out before it reaches critical mass, you can get healthy again. And that's the most important thing. So what to do about that? Okay, so if you're listening to this and you're thinking, how do I do that? The first thing, I mean, these are sort of mindset shifts as well as strategy shifts. Number one is a mindset shift. Number one is being willing to take full accountability for your happiness and willingness to own everything that you can. No matter what, but they did this. But I only did that because they did that. That way of thinking is going to take away your power, and you're not going to be able to see where your leverage actually is as long as you're doing that. And especially if your spouse is ambivalent and you're still trying to get them, if you're trying to get them to see their part still and they're the ones that they have one foot out the door, you have zero leverage and it's a losing game. It's better if it's the other way around in that case. If you're the one who is the ambivalent one and now you're willing to take full accountability for a period of time, right? Because I always say relationships are not 50-50, they're 100%, 100%. Each person has to take 100%. Okay, and I know that doesn't seem right mathematically, but it is. It's like spiritually correct in terms of how to approach a relationship. So you have to be willing to change the environment of your relationship through your own energy, your own commitment to your happiness, your own moment by moment actions that contribute to a culture of appreciation and respect. Fostering a culture of appreciation and respect is the antidote to contempt. You know, actively looking for what's going well that I'm taking for granted. Well, yeah, they're nice. I mean, they do all this stuff. I hear people say this all the time. Well, I mean, they are helpful. I mean, they do all these things, but, and then I'll ask them to elaborate on the thing they just glossed over. And it's like a laundry list of things that are really amazing that they've just glossed over because there's this one thing that isn't right. And it has all this meaning because of their own stuff that they've attached meaning to that. And so you have to be willing to look at that. That's number one. Or both of you do. If you're with someone, no matter if you're willing to do that, this is my one caveat. If your spouse has one foot out the door and they're narcissist or they have an acute addiction that is not being treated, or if you're in an abusive marriage, taking full accountability is not your best bet. So that's my disclaimer. That's not true in those cases. But if you're not in those kinds of situations, then it always pays to start with yourself first, even if you see yourself as the victim. But that's the problem. So you can change that. The second thing is moving into the culture of appreciation and specifically what that looks like, okay? You really want to look for what's going well. You want to, verbal expressions of appreciation and building that in. It might not feel like second nature to you, but you have to do that, make that little effort, because if that's not landing on them and all they're getting, if the only thing that's landing on them is the negative stuff, then eventually you're in that danger zone of, when I talked about the ratio. If you have not heard of the 5-to-1 ratio, what he said is that when you get into like 50-50, that's when you're in the danger zone. You're in crisis if you're about 50-50. 50% of the time is positive, it's still danger zone. So that's something to keep in mind. You really want to stack these things like 5-to-1. Verbal expressions of appreciation, seeking the good, expanding the number of positive interactions. What do they like? How can you have fun together? What moments can be nice, even though there's these other things over here that are not solved? Does that have to interfere with right now? Can we have a nice time right now? And then remembering that just, anything that anybody gives you in a marriage, it's always a choice and it's always a gift. It's always a choice and it's always a gift. Nobody owes you anything, even in a marriage. Okay? You have an agreement, and if somebody doesn't keep their agreement, like let's say you have an agreement of fidelity and somebody breaks that agreement, you're not bound anymore by that agreement because it's been broken. So, and I'll talk about deal breakers in a second, depending on what your deal breakers are. That's not always a deal breaker. Infidelity is not always a deal breaker, but essentially it's an agreement between two people. And you have to be willing to ask for things that you want, but know that it is a choice. It's a choice that they're making. And if they make the choice to meet your needs, if they make the choice to nurture you, if they make the choice to be sensitive to you, to your sensitivities, or to caretake you, or to be kind to you, or to, try to have your best interest at heart and create an environment in which you thrive, all of that is a gift, and it shouldn't be taken for granted. It's something that it takes work, it takes effort, and it takes an intention. And anything that requires a conscious intention is worthy of our respect and acknowledgement. So don't take anything for granted. The other thing I think that goes along with this, and that I have seen be the biggest shift in people who have transformed their relationships, where they've really been on the brink, is the ability and the capacity to be vulnerable and recognizing that you actually have nothing to lose. I hear from people a lot of times say, well, I don't feel safe. My spouse doesn't make me feel safe. I do believe in creating relationships where both people feel safe. I understand the importance of that. And I'm not recommending that people stay in a relationship where they don't feel safe emotionally. But I want to just say this more on like a philosophical level, which is that you aren't unsafe, even though somebody might not make it safe for you, right? Unless you're actually in an like physically unsafe situation. You're not actually unsafe if you're vulnerable. The worst thing that can happen is that you don't feel heard or understood or seen, and then that triggers old pain from your life. But nothing bad really happened in that moment except somebody didn't get it. But who you are as a human being and what you have shared as a human being is still all good and fine, and nothing bad has happened. You've just been seen, and that feels really scary. But that's the only way that people can take full accountability. That's the only way people can actually have the come to Jesus moment of realizing, I am making mistakes. I am sorry. It is humbling. You have to be willing to be vulnerable. You have to be willing to be humble, to be able to turn things around and not say, yeah, but. And in your shortcomings, or to be vulnerable in expressing how someone else's behavior, how it's landed on you, the impact that it's had on you, to be able to share the power that someone has over you because of who you are and where you've been. That's an act of courage, and it's brave. And so nothing bad has really happened, even if they don't get it. Now, we want them to, and there's ways to set that up for success. But just as like food for thought, if that's what's holding you back, I just want to say that. The other thing that's super important to get really clear before you can find out what's salvageable or not in a relationship, and also to prevent it from crossing that point of no return, is boundaries. Because I think what exponentially accelerates people crossing that line and reaching that marital no return is when things snowball because you don't know whose problem is whose. You become implicated in a problem that your spouse is having, or because you're picking it up. You're picking up what's not yours, or the other way around. Or you're spilling your stuff out onto them, and maybe they're carrying it, or maybe they don't want to carry it and you want them to carry it. Those are boundary things. And those kinds of boundary issues exponentially catapult you to the point of no return. So you can get a lot of bang for your buck in terms of working on your relationship by focusing on boundaries. And I've talked a lot about boundaries and how it links with so many different things. And you can check out my videos in the announcement section on boundaries and how they relate to other areas. But for this, you really want to be thinking, whose feelings are whose? These are the questions to ask yourself. Whose feelings are whose? Which thing is whose problem? Which thing is not my problem that I have picked up as though it's mine, and now I've responded in a way that now makes me part of the problem, right? And we have to untangle that. If they have feelings about something and then you have feelings about their feelings, things get messy. A good boundary would be like, if someone's having a problem, let's say your spouse is having a problem with something that you did that you have to stand by, and they're having feelings about it, but then you get mad at them for having their reaction. Now it's your problem too. So don't pick up what isn't yours, not only with your spouse, but everybody, obviously. And this is a general rule in life, but so much of this stuff isn't done in the family of origin. And so For some people, this isn't going to be possible to do unless you are willing to go back, not to rehash your whole life, not to stay stuck in this phase, but people that do this inner work and actually have to figure out what's inside of them that is creating problematic aspects of the relationship that's leading to crisis or possibly getting to that point of no return. You have to be willing to go back and look at that and say, this is where it came from. This is the meaning that I hold around it. This is why. And now that I understand that, now I know what to do, what to let go of, what to heal, and what to create instead. And I just think that unless you can't really bypass that, if anything that you're doing in your marriage, it feels familiar, or if your spouse is making you feel like you felt as a kid, there's not going to be any way to move forward unless some of that you look at your family of origin or do some of that inner work and heal from the past. That's not the whole problem, but it is the originator of your perceptual filter. That's where it comes from. And you can't, it's like going back to the source to fix it is going to be so much easier. You know, if you think about the source of a river and you're trying to wall up all the tributaries, it's so much harder than if you just go to the source and dam that up, right? You want to go to the source. And so people avoid that. And that's why that goes back to the avoidance piece and the sort of putting your head in the sand, is that sometimes people have a sense that there's more going on and it just feels really scary, and it might not even be a conscious choice of, oh, this is family of origin and I'm not going to look at that. It might just be something that they instinctively feel and they just want to, and so they're just putting their head in the sand before they even had that conscious thought. So, you know, that I'm not saying it's different for everybody. It would really depend on your situation, whether or not that would be the case. But you definitely want to keep that in mind. If you've had the same pattern for years, you have to be willing to commit to making changes. And this is actually the last point that I want to make. You have to be willing to say, I'm going to commit to making changes, which I know that sounds really obvious, but people think they've done that when they haven't actually done that. They think that they've already committed to working on the relationship because they've recognized that they have problems and because they've talked about it a couple times, or because they've tried to do a couple things. Like, really committing is to decide something is going to be very different from this moment forward. Like, I'm going to change my whole life around healing this relationship. That's really what it takes when you're at that point. Okay? And being able to commit to making changes, especially if you've been working on the relationship and it hasn't been working, then you have to be willing to get help. It's always going to feel inconvenient. It's always going to feel scary. It's every time going to feel out of your comfort zone. And if you're trying to do it in your comfort zone, you haven't really committed to making changes, because it's still within the existing paradigm of your comfort zone. If the work that you're doing is still within the existing paradigm of your comfort zone, that's not a real decision of being like, okay, I'm committing, and that means I'm going to set aside this much time every week. This is how my days will be different. This is what I will be doing for myself every day. Like, it changes everything when people finally do this work. When you're at that point, it is not something that happens on the margins. It's not something that happens in the background. It becomes front and center. So if you're there, that's what you have to do. And that's the best way. You know, if you feel like you're entering into that territory, don't be lulled by that sense of avoidance. And I want to say that a lot of times there's men of a certain generation who fall into this category, and I hate to make generalizations, but there's men of a certain generation that I had in mind when I just said that last thing, who have been lulled into in their comfort zone, and they're not recognizing, largely because of the generation and because of how they were raised as men, because so much of our relational identity is gendered, whether we like it or not, depending on, and some of us adopt that more than others. But a lot of men have been taught that you're weak if you share things, or, you know, it is terrifying to think about doing this work, because it literally feels like, oh, I will die. Like, my whole sense of who I am is going to die in order to become somebody who can be available in the relationship that I want to maintain, but that will no longer work for my spouse anymore, who has one foot out the door. So That's it, you guys. That's all I have for you today. And if you are thinking about this and you want help around this, you certainly can book a call with me, as I always invite you to do, at monikahoyt.com/talk. And I'll put a link below, monikahoyt.com/talk. If you feel like you're in the danger zone and you're not sure what to do, if you're wondering if you've crossed that point and you're not sure what the prognosis is it too late? Is it not too late? Certainly you can reach out to me and I'll tell you the truth. I'll tell you if I think it's too late. I talk to people all the time where it is too late. And I've worked with people who thought it was too late and it wasn't too late. And so I can help sort of identify what are the variables and factors in your relationship that would need to be focused on, or the areas that don't need to be focused on, because you definitely want to shore up your resources and you want to get really targeted on like what is going to give you the most effective change quickly. Because when you're in that red zone and you're heading towards that line, it's really a timing thing. You know, it's really about the time and you want to do it quickly. So book a call with me. It's a free call at 45 minutes. We'll just break that down. And if it looks like it's something I can help you with, I'll let you know. If it's something I think I can't help you with, I will let you know that too and connect you with who can or get you the right resources. But either way, you know, it'll be getting clarity on the call. Also, if you have questions, you can post them in the comments underneath this video in the group. And I'm actually going to look and see if anybody this is a live Q&A, if anybody's here. On the platform that I'm on, I can't see who wrote the comment, but I see a comment that says, should I share this with my husband? Absolutely, absolutely share it with your husband. Even if he's not in the group, you can add him in the group, or this video will be uploaded to YouTube. So you can always just share the YouTube link. It will be public. You can look for it. In the next like 24 hours, it should be up there. So that's okay. And then, yeah, by all means, you know, you said I'll have to come back and watch the beginning and come back with questions. Absolutely. And this will be a replay for people. If you have questions, please put them in and I will answer them. And then if you know of anybody that could benefit from this group, whether it be this video or any of the other videos that I've been doing, or any other posts in the community that's in this group, we have a really wonderful community. It's very supportive in here. Feel free to add them on the right-hand side of this Art of Healthy Authentic Marriages Facebook group. And then I will still have to approve them into the group. But if I see that an existing member recommended them, then I most absolutely will, most likely, I'm not going to guarantee it, but usually I always do accept those invites. So yeah, share this with people that could benefit from this, because I think it's so sad to me when people who truly love each other, that really saw themselves for life, go the distance. You know, they have families that they don't want to tear apart, and it's really just a matter of timing and readiness to recognize it before it's too late. That's all it is. That's all it is. And I mean, there's work involved, right? But the people that I talk to, like the woman I mentioned at the beginning of my call, it's not a matter of them not being willing to do the work. It's just a matter that they came to that willingness too late. That's all. And so in that sense, it's a timing thing. And that breaks my heart. I don't know. It feels like tragic to me when people miss each other just because of timing and just because of readiness. So I hope this was helpful for you. Thanks for tuning in. I look forward to your questions, and I will catch you guys next time. Have a good rest of the week.